The objectives for today is to discuss what is light therapy and how it works, what is dermokinetics and how does that work, and then how we're going to use ABI dermaceuticals to pre- and post-treat for these technologies, as well as what does PowerPure technology mean as well. Now, if you look at the 3 different modalities we're offering, they are very, very synergistic, meaning they work well together. They're designed to work with each other, and they are based on the use of putting light therapy with dermokinetics and ABI dermaceuticals. Each one of these individual treatments can work and stand on their own. However, optimal results are achieved when we use all 3 together. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is the power of light and light therapy in general, and how it works and why it works. So first, let's kind of take a look at what is light therapy. Light therapy is the process of exposing the skin to specific wavelengths of color of light so that the body can use the light energy to combat the signs of aging and heal faster and more effectively. Now, most people think, they look at the light and they say, how can it do so many different things? Well, the light is really the mechanism or the trigger so that the body can do all the different things that it should be doing, but doesn't because environmental damage and the aging process. So the light is really the mechanism or the trigger to help the body to perform optimally. Now, if you think about it for a minute, and you take a plant and you give it the best soil possible and the highest quality fertilizer, but you deprive it of light, what's going to happen to that plant? It's going to die. There is no way for a plant to take in these wonderful nutrients and convert it to food that it can utilize without light. Now, on a human being level, we won't die without light, but on a cellular level, we do. We start to degrade on a cellular level without certain amounts of light and ability to transfer the energy we take in and the food we take in into energy we can utilize. Here's about a 20,000-foot view of what light therapy is. Basic overview. First thing you would do is you expose the body to specific wavelengths of light known as photons. Next, what happens if you have a high enough dose is the biological systems within the body come in contact with these photons. When they come in contact with these photons or this light energy, one of 3 things can happen. It can either be absorbed, it can be reflected, or it can pass right through the cells. Finally, if the photons are absorbed, the body uses the photon energy to produce biological changes, such as stimulating adenotriphosphate, or ATP, which in turn produces more collagen and elastin. And that's our goal, is to give the body a dose of photon energy, then have the cells and tissue absorb the photon energy and convert it into processes within the body where we can stimulate ATP production, and the end result is more collagen and elastin. Now, in order for light therapy to work for anti-aging, photon energy must be able to penetrate, first of all, into the body. If it does not penetrate into the body, it will not work. The second thing that has to happen is once it penetrates into the body, it has to be absorbed by the target tissue and cells. So the 2 main things that have to happen in order for light therapy to work, no matter what device you're using, is you have to have penetration and absorption. Now, how do we make sure that light therapy is going to penetrate and be absorbed by the target tissue? They are dependent upon many different things, including the wavelength that we're giving the body, the power output, the treatment time, how long are we exposing the body to the wavelengths of light, the design and delivery of the light therapy system, because proximity, how far away are we from the light, how close are we to the light, and then making sure that the skin is properly prepared for light therapy. Now, keep in mind, if you have no penetration or absorption, you will get no biological change, which means light therapy won't work. So you have to have these things happen in order for light therapy to give your clients good results. Now we take a look at wavelength. Wavelength means the start of one wave to the beginning of next. Light travels in waves, just like water does. Now when we measure a wavelength, we're measuring the distance from one point to the next, and that would determine the color of light that we see in the visible light spectrum. So light traveling in waves, the closer the wave is, the further it is to the left of the spectrum, The further away it is, the further into the body it's going to go. So let's kind of look more at this. Generally, the shorter the wavelength, the less it penetrates and the quicker it is absorbed by the body. So if we're looking for light to go deep into the body, we need to have a longer wavelength than a shorter wavelength. Now, if we're looking for light to penetrate in order to get a good biological response, we need to look at where it is on the wavelength spectrum to determine how far into the body it's going to go and where it's going to end up, and determining which target tissue and cells will absorb the light. Now, we look at wavelengths that have a lot of scientific data behind them, and they've been proven over and over again in over 2,500 different studies. We look at blue light in the 420 range, and it's got a little bit of a range there. It goes anywhere from 415 up to 425. That is primarily used for targeting the P. acne bacteria. It doesn't penetrate very far into the body, but it doesn't need to because it's looking for a reaction near the surface. Now, the 630, the red light, has a lot of data behind it, and that goes from about a 630 up to a 650. Somewhere in that spectrum is absorbed very easily by the mitochondria, and it provides what they consider a superficial penetration. It does not go as deep as the infrared. The infrared in the 880 spectrum is absorbed by the proteins. It's found in the cell membrane. It increases permeability of the cells, so it allows more nutrients into the cell, more waste out of the cell, and it helps to detoxify the body, and it's considered a much deeper penetration than your blue or your red light. Take a look at depth of penetration. We look at the blue light. It's a wavelength generally in the 420, which is what the light wave is. It's absorbed primarily in the epidermis, the stratum corneum, where you have your acne. The red light, it goes much, much deeper into the body, and it penetrates more superficially, obviously, than the infrared, but it still can go up to the first 2 centimeters into the body. And then the infrared light goes much deeper into the body and can actually penetrate up to 8 centimeters into the body. So when we look at this and we say, okay, all cells have a unique absorption spectrum which will determine which color of light or which wavelength will be absorbed, which one will reflect, and which one will pass right through, we look at which cells we're trying to target to determine what kind of change we're trying to get within the body. So if we're trying to get collagen elastin production, we're going to go ahead and target the fibroblasts. So we have to look at, well, where are we going to find the fibroblasts within the body to target them? We don't want to go too superficial. We also don't want to go too deep where it passes right through the cells. So absorption is really important in determining how far in the body we're going to go and which cells we're targeting. So in order for light therapy to work, we have to remember if we don't get absorption, we're going to get no biological change. So there's that goes into this. So when we look at photons or light that is going into the body, we look at and we say, okay, once photons are absorbed by the body, a biological change can occur. Now we need to know which cells we're targeting to know what kind of biological change, which is why the light therapy system has 14 different settings. We're targeting different cells at different depths, determining on how much red light we're exposing the body to and how much infrared light and how much blue we're exposing the body to. So if you look at this chart here, it shows the fibroblasts. It has 3 X's. The fibroblasts are going to absorb red light in the 630 to 670 range, fairly easy in comparison to the infrared light. And that's primarily due to where the fibroblasts are located. They're located much more superficial than the infrared light can penetrate. So some of the infrared light will penetrate as it goes through the cells that are superficial, and it will continue to keep on traveling. But from the majority, infrared light is going to go much, much further. When we look at wound healing or the mast cells, and we're looking at bringing down inflammation and redness, we're going to use a combination of red and infrared light to do that because we can see that they're both very beneficial. Now, infrared light gives off a little thermal energy. So if we're doing a treatment of light therapy post-laser, we would not utilize infrared light the first go-round because we can see that red light is still going to work, but it's not going to give any thermal energy. And the last thing we want to do is have heat associated with a treatment that was just all based on heat with the laser. So there's a lot of thought processes that go into the protocols that have been set up and designed to be used with the different modalities that are available. So using a combination of different lights delivered at different times, we're able to stimulate different cells and counteract the undesired effects of aging. So we're able to figure out which cells we want to target, which wavelength we want to use, how long we want to expose those target tissue to the light in order to get optimal results. Now, penetration and absorption are also dependent on the power output and the treatment time. When we look at power output, all these different systems on the market today have different power outputs. If the system is not powerful enough, it will not penetrate into the body. So the Lightwave has been designed to make sure there's enough power delivered that we're going to actually get the light into the body. And then we also make sure that we don't have too much power. We're below the 200 milliwatt threshold so that we don't cause damage to the tissue going into the body. So there's science that goes into determining how much power. Too much power, we're going to cause tissue damage going into the body. Not enough power, we're not even going to get photon penetration. So we're not even going to get the light in there. So some people ask me, can I go back and stand near my car taillights and get the same treatment as I would from a Lightwave treatment? And the answer is absolutely not. And the reason being is because of the wavelength and how much power is being put out by that particular LED. Now the next thing we need to look at to make sure we get penetration and absorption is the exposure time. How long do I need to be under the lights? Most cells satiate out between 15 and 17 minutes, meaning they absorb as much as they possibly can as long as you have penetration occurring. So if I only go under the lights for, say, 90 seconds, that is not long enough to get a good biological response. That is not high enough dosage in order to make changes within the skin. Now, if I go a full 20 minutes, the cells satiate, let's say, between 15 and 17 minutes. That means that once the cells have absorbed as much photon energy as they can, the rest of the photon energy that enters the body will just pass right through and will be disposed of, similar to taking 2 vitamins in one day. If I take excess vitamins, the body will dispose of that excess and you'll just have really expensive pee. So we make most of our treatments 20 minutes because we know that most people will satiate out between 15 and 17 minutes. And if that's the case, we would rather give them excess light that will be disposed of than underdose them and not give them enough. And there is not a magic number that everybody satiates out at the same time. So that's why we give the window between 15 and 17 minutes and make most treatments 20 minutes. Now people will ask me, how often can I do treatments? Can I do them every day? What if I do them once a week? What if I come once a month? The key here is if we do daily treatments, it will not work. It takes 24 to 36 hours for those photon receptor sites to be available to absorb more photon energy. So if your cells are absorbing this light energy as it comes into the body, it's going to take between 24 and 36 hours before those same cells can absorb more photon energy. So if I do treatments back to back to back and those cell receptor sites are not available to absorb more photon energy, I'm not going to get a good biological response. So most people, when we talk to them, optimal idea would be to come in every other day to do light therapy. But that's not practical in most people's lives. So if they come twice a week, that seems to be a protocol that most people can follow and live with. However, if they can't and they come once a week, it's going to prolong the results they see because it's going to take that much longer for you to get a high enough dosage to get a good biological response. And if they come in once a month and they're aging faster than they can repair those cells, you may not see visible results on the skin. So twice a week is ideal for most of the protocols. However, once a week can be incorporated because you can still get a good biological response. It will just take you longer. If they're coming once a month, then it's probably not the best treatment regimen for them because they'll probably have cell degradation faster, and that's going to depend on their age, skin type, their environmental factors such as smoking, drinking, diet, and exercise. All of that will affect how fast cell degradation happens and what kind of results we'll see. Now, with that being said, skin penetration is also dependent on preparing the skin. So when we say, okay, we want to get light therapy into the skin, it's really, really important that we make sure we properly prepare the skin. And the way you prepare the skin is, first of all, making sure that you remove the dead skin cells before an LED treatment. You can do that in multiple ways. You can do that with a good enzyme wash. You can do that with a good scrub. You can do it with a microderm or a peel. But you have to remove anything that's on the skin as well as the dead skin cells. If you don't, not as much photon or light energy is going to penetrate into the skin, which is going to result in a decrease in outcome or results. So with that being said, it's really important to make sure that you cleanse their skin when they come in for a treatment. Most people think, oh, well, I only have a little bit of mineral makeup on. It won't matter. I can go ahead and do my LED treatment. Well, mineral makeup has a lot of highly reflective ingredients in it, and leaving that on the skin during an LED treatment will cause the results to diminish significantly because the light will not be absorbed into the body. It will be reflected off. So do not leave any reflective ingredients, and that's why most of our protocols all say to properly prepare the skin, wash the skin at a minimum. If you can exfoliate, you get better results long term. Now, we also need to take a look at how close we place the LED panels. LED is scattered light particles, which means the light, it illuminates in all different directions. It's not like a laser because it's not culminated and coherent. If I turn on a laser, I can see that pinpoint accuracy on the wall across the room. If I turn on an LED, it glows everywhere because the light is scattered light particles. So in order to get a good biological response from the body and get a high absorption of photon energy, you need to first make sure the skin is prepped, and then you also need to make sure the panels are placed right around the target area, which is why we have the hinge effect on the Lightwave system, so that if you're trying to get the periorbital wrinkles around the eye, you can go ahead and contour that to the face, making sure you're getting as close as possible and all that photon energy is penetrating inward. So you really want to make sure you place the LED panels as close as the client will allow and still be comfortable. If someone is claustrophobic, we found that keeping the side wings open when you initially start the treatment and then close them slowly over time is very comfortable for your clients. But just keep in mind, the closer you place the panel, the greater the dosage of photon energy and the greater the outcome, because the greater photon absorption will occur. Now, the next thing you need to keep in mind, which is what makes LED significantly different than a laser, is that the properties of light, the photon energy, it's a photochemical reaction within the body that causes changes, not a thermal reaction, not heat. So you should not be heating your client's tissue in order to get a good response. It's a photochemical reaction that occurs within the body. So when we look at delivery systems, some people will say, well, why would I want to do a Lightwave treatment? I can just go and pick up a handheld and do the treatment myself. Well, if you look at handhelds versus the Lightwave, you'll see that handhelds do make direct skin contact, which means very little photon energy is lost, but you need to hold it in one particular place for a minimum of 20 minutes, if not longer, because you're only using a few LEDs. So a lot of the handhelds will direct you to move around, and if that's something you're used to and have done in the past, now that you have a Lightwave, you need to make sure that you're not moving it around. You have direct skin contact with the handheld, which means you don't lose photon energy, but the dosage is not anywhere close to the hands-free because of the sheer number of LEDs being used. And with a hands-free, you can have a significant more coverage area than you would with a handheld. So when you look at a handheld versus hand-free and your clients are asking you about it, you can let them know that you're using more LEDs, you're using what's known as super luminous LEDs in the Lightwave, which means that we have a much higher output of power that's generated, and the coverage area obviously is much, much bigger. And then a lot of times people will say, well, should the lights be pulsing or should they be continuous? It depends on the outcome you're looking from the target tissue. Some of the programs and protocols with the Lightwave pulse, and some are continuous. If we pulse them, we increase the treatment time because they shut off for a portion of the time. Every time a light pulses, it turns on, it turns off, it turns on, it turns off, which means that those cells are not going to satiate out in 15 to 17 minutes. They're going to satiate out maybe possibly over 30 if it's a 50% duty cycle. So the pulsing will affect the treatment time. If it's continuous with and it's on the whole time, then most people will satiate out between 15 and 17 minutes. And then we look at monochromatic versus polychromatic. Some people will go for LED treatments down the street, and they'll come to you and say, I was down the street and I got a red and blue treatment where they turn the lights on at the exact same time. That would be considered a polychromatic treatment. All of the settings on Lightwave are considered monochromatic, which means that we deliver one wavelength of light during a single time, which means we'll never have two or more wavelengths traveling in the same direction at the same moment. So we'll never be able to turn on the red and the blue simultaneously. You can do a red treatment followed by a blue, or a blue followed by a red, or a red and an infrared at different times, but you cannot do them at the exact same second. And the reason being is if you look at how we have wavelength A in blue, wavelength B in red, when you have scattered light particles traveling in the same direction, you can have what's known as destructive interference or constructive interference, which means those two wavelengths will interfere with each other and create a whole new wavelength. And if wavelength determines whether the tissue, once it gets into the body, will be absorbed by the cells, so if the wavelength is going to determine whether those cells will absorb the light or not, we need to make sure that the wavelength is very specific. And if we start changing the wavelength, then when the light gets into the body, it will probably be reflected or pass right through, and you'll get a very low biological response from the body or no change whatsoever. So it's really important that we do one wavelength followed by another. There's a lot of systems on the market that use polychromatic. And basically they've taken the premises of a laser and they've applied it to an LED. A laser is culminated and coherent, which means that from start to finish it's going to remain the same. LED is scattered light particles, meaning it's non-culminated, non-coherent, which means that the light goes in every which direction and can cause whole new wavelengths to be created. So you cannot take the principles of laser and apply them to LED in this situation. You can't have two wavelengths traveling in the same direction with LED and expect the wavelengths to remain the same. So these systems that have that out there are doing their clients a huge disservice. Now, what can I expect from LED light therapy? What immediate changes are going to happen? Well, the first thing is the mitochondria, and this is under the anti-aging settings. The mitochondria in the cells absorb the photon energy. They convert it into biochemical energy known as adenotriphosphate or ATP, and that results in increased cellular activity and mitosis. So I like to think of it as a copier. Imagine you take a copy and then you place that on a copier and you make a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Over time, the quality of that copy will start to degrade. Similar to our cells, over time, cell degradation starts to occur. The information being transmitted from one cell to the next starts to degrade. So if similar to that of a copy, the information from one copy to a next, if I make a copy of a copy, starts to be hard to read. So what light therapy does is it provides the energy necessary for us to first speed up how many copies being made so that now we can start making a whole bunch of copies. And then the second thing that happens is we start speeding up, we start improving the copy quality. The cell becomes more permeable, which means more nutrients into the cell and more waste out of the cell. So it starts to make huge changes there. And that happens after just one treatment of LED. We get an increase in cellular activity. The other thing is a release of endorphins. A lot of people find that an LED treatment is relaxing and should be enjoyable. So if they can find a way to relax under the bright light, you'll see that most people, and we've had people even go to sleep because of the endorphin release. It does increase blood circulation, which is great because it can get more nutrients to those areas that need it. However, if you have an open wound, you wouldn't want to put them under LED until that wound is closed up, because it will increase blood circulation. It will reduce inflammation, so any redness and inflammation and edema associated with it. I had a woman who had an allergic reaction to a mask we did on her. She started to welt up and turn really red, and we immediately stuck her under LED, and before she left, all the welting, all the redness was completely gone. So there was something in there she had an allergic reaction to that she wasn't aware she was even allergic to until we saw the welting. Immediately stuck her under LED, and you couldn't even tell she had a reaction before she left the office. So it's really good at reducing inflammation. If you pick at someone's face and you're doing extractions and they're really, really red and you know they're going somewhere, you can immediately stick them under LED and see a pretty good reduction in inflammation and redness. And the great thing is it begins to restore normal cellular function. So over time, cell degradation happens to people, and if we can restore the normal cellular function, we can get great results that we can see on the skin. And the first thing that we really notice with LED is the tone and texture starts to improve. But over 24 different positive changes start to take into effect right away with one treatment of LED. Now, the long-term results is what we're looking for with LED, and the long-term results that occur after doing LED for several sessions is we start to see major repairs to damaged tissue. We see that tissue that normally maybe would not close up or has a wound open, we can see those changes start to take place, and those wounds starting to close. We can see an improvement in tone and texture. We can start to see pore size changes. Collagen elastin starts to be built. So that's the long-term results. And collagen is usually 8 to 12 weeks to actually see on the surface of the skin. And then, I'm sorry, elasticity is 8 to 12 weeks, and collagen is about 6 months. So it does take a while. However, they don't need to do LED that whole time. Once you've triggered the mechanisms and the process, it's simply just now a waiting game for those changes to take place in the body and for them to show on the surface of the skin. It increases lymphatic system drainage, so the dark circles around the eyes start to change. It starts to detoxify the skin tissue. We actually saw in a client that was a smoker for years and years and years. Her skin actually started to yellow during the LED sessions because it was drawing out the toxins from years of smoking. It helps to smooth out an uneven pigment, so you start to see a more consistent coloring. It thickens and firms the thin skin, increases production of collagen elastin, which with anti-aging is kind of like the holy grail. So as I mentioned before, elasticity is an 8 to 12 week process. Collagen is a 6-month process, but it just would consist of 8 to 10 LED treatments to trigger that collagen and elastin growth. And here we've taken a look at a woman in her 40s. So we can see at 8,000 magnification, her collagen bundles were fairly small. She simply is recycling the collagen she has, because after the age of 30 to 35, we're no longer producing collagen. We simply recycle what we have. So her collagen bundles were extremely small. However, we did 10 sessions of light therapy on her and then waited for the body to grow those collagen bundles. And when we revisited her collagen bundles, the growth was enormous. It was significant. So by increasing the adenotriphosphate and the activity of the cells, we can get great cell productivity, we can spark the healing process, and we can get a good formation of collagen. Now, the most common things that Lightwave is utilized for is improving the skin tone and texture and the pore size. It's improving the fine lines and wrinkles that you see, especially around the eyes and nose and mouth area. It helps to diminish the appearance of stretch marks. Nothing gets rid of stretch marks in its entirety, but if you can get new stretch marks under LED, the results will significantly improve. If they're old stretch marks, then what you would want to do is you want to go ahead and ablate them first so that the body says, okay, we need to now heal this area, and then you would do light therapy. Now, stretch marks are basically a form of scarring, so you will see a fine white lines. Nothing's ever going to get rid of scars in its entirety, but diminishing them significantly is what we're trying to accomplish. Same thing, we use it for acne and regular scar reduction, post-surgical wound care, flaccid skin, and pre- and post-ablative like your CO2 laser treatment care. We have a large amount of facilities that use it for post-laser. Now, some of the frequently asked questions that your customers will come up with or may have already come up with is, what can I expect after the first treatment? It's really important, in order to give them a sense of how this works, is to tell them nothing. Even though we know that there'll be immediate change after one treatment, you're better off to underpromise and overdeliver than to tell them, oh, you'll start to see an increase in blood circulation and your cells will start dividing immediately and maybe feel a plumpness to the face. If you tell your clients that, they'll come back and say nothing happened. So it's much better to underpromise and overdeliver and tell them after the first treatment you're not going to notice many changes at all, if any. And so I always recommend that you underpromise rather than overpromise. And how long does each treatment session last? It depends on what you include with it, but most are 20 minutes, as I mentioned before, because most people will satiate out between 15 and 17 minutes of proper photon delivery. The treatment should not hurt under any circumstances, so it's a photochemical reaction that occurs within the body, which has no pain associated with it. The most discomfort they may feel is just the bright lights. So if that's the discomfort, then generally what you can do is you can go ahead and try to block out the LED more with our laser shield blockers or with the LED stickies on the eyes. Or some people have even dampened cotton balls and put quarters on the eyes to block out the light. I personally have no problem with the light and have been doing it for years, and I don't even use the goggles, even though I highly recommend them for all clients. So it should not hurt under any circumstances. Now, do they need to stay out of the sun? Obviously, to protect the cellular health, they do, but you don't have to be worried like a laser that you're going to get hypopigmentation or hyperpigmentation if they go in the sun after an LED treatment. So that's kind of a yes and a no. Common sense says yes, stay out of the sun, but no, they don't absolutely have to and have to be worried about changes like hypopigmentation or hyperpigmentation. Now, are there any side effects they should be concerned about? The only side effects that we've seen over time is that we see that we'll notice that people will break out in what looks like a rash if they cannot metabolize the light. So if they can't dispose of the excess light, they can get what looks like a heat rash, and that can last up to a day and a half. Some people will just have prolonged redness. So they'll look flushed in the face, and that will last up to a day and a half. This is a very, very, very small percentage of the population. In the time I've been doing it since 2002, I've only seen 3 people break out in what looks like a heat rash, and I've seen the prolonged redness less than a dozen times. So it's not something you see very often, but that basically means that they're not metabolizing the light, and so you kind of want to keep an eye out for them. That does not mean they have to discontinue light therapy altogether. It just means that you want to decrease the dosage the next time they came in. And you can decrease the dosage by decreasing the treatment time or increasing the proximity of how close the LED is to their skin, so you can make sure the panel is further away. Now, what actually happens during the treatment we've talked about. The cells start to divide and cellular changes start to take place along with the ATP production. And then how is this different than a laser? A lot of times we get that question. And as I've kind of mentioned throughout the presentation, that a laser, before it penetrates tissue, is culminated and coherent. If I shine it on the wall, it will remain a solid beam, which is why they've outlawed them. You can't shine them at planes, because that beam will travel all the way up into the atmosphere, culminated and coherent. When it hits the skin tissue, it creates a thermal response. It actually burns the tissue. Where an LED is scattered light particles, it's not culminated, non-coherent, and it creates a photochemical response. So it takes a lot more LED treatments than it would a single laser treatment to get the photon energy into the body. However, once the light travels through the first millimeter of tissue, the body cannot differentiate between, oh, that's laser, I'm going to do this, or that's LED, I'm going to give this reaction. Once laser light penetrates into the body and LED light penetrates into the body, once it's past its first millimeter, all light becomes scattered, loses its culminated and coherent properties, and the reaction within the body is the same. So laser and light produce a very similar response. It's how they get there. One is thermal, one is photochemical. The LED takes quite a few more treatments because it doesn't cause any tissue damage going into the body. Now, the standard Lightwave anti-aging protocol is we would cleanse the skin, and we would suggest doing that with the ABI exfoliating enzyme wash or a couple of our other exfoliants to remove the dead skin cells and allow for proper penetration of the light. Then you would expose the skin to 20 minutes of continuous red and infrared light. They never come on at the same time. They alternate. Start with red, then it goes to infrared, back to red, and finishes with infrared. After they're finished, then you would want to apply antioxidants and sunscreen to maintain those results and protect the changes that you've made. They would come in twice a week for 4 to 5 weeks, and generally you need 8 to 10 treatments to see optimal results. And the optimal results are generally seen at the 6-month mark. So you would start with your 8 to 10 treatments. Usually treatment number 6 is where you start to see a noticeable change, a significant and noticeable change. And then by treatment number 10, they're finished. However, they will continue to change on a cellular level even though they're not being inundated with light therapy. Now, how do they maintain the results? It will depend upon the lifestyle that your client lives. However, maintenance is generally once a month or once every 6 weeks. If they're a smoker or a drinker or poor dieting habits, you may need to see them once every 3 weeks to 4 weeks. If they're really diligent about taking care of their skin and they use their sunscreen, you probably only need to see them for one single treatment every 6 to 8 weeks. So maintenance is dependent upon how they treat their skin in the downtime between treatments. So once they finish their initial 8 to 10 treatments, they'll come back once every 6 to 8 weeks in general to see you for a single treatment. Now here's an example of the wound healing. You have a form of fistula on the face that would not heal. You could actually fit your pinky into her face. There was no blood associated with it. However, it would not close up. After being exposed to light therapy, the closure started to occur, the revitalization of the skin cells started to happen, and we saw the wound close up significantly and completely over time. It also works for hair restoration. It does not work on dead follicles. It only works on follicles that are in the resting phase and bringing them out of the resting phase. So you have to evaluate where your client is when they start to determine whether they will get any good biological response. Now, if you're wondering, are they a candidate for light therapy for hair restoration, then you'd want to look and see have they had a reaction to Propecia. If they react to Propecia, that means those hair follicles are still alive, and you can use light therapy on them. However, hair growth does take a significant amount of treatments in order to get a good response. Rosacea. Rosacea clients, the light therapy can be used on your rosacea clients. However, because it does increase blood circulation, you want to make sure that you're very careful to inform your clients of how it can affect their skin. After one treatment of LED, they're going to be very, very, very red because you've increased blood circulation. However, after that red dissipates, they should have less redness than when you started. And you should start to see a significant change, especially over time, to rosacea clients. But you definitely want to educate them that, hey, this is going to make you really red before it changes your skin. Now, we've talked about LED light therapy, and we're going to take about a 2-minute break, and then we're going to go on to dermokinetics and transdermal delivery. If you have any questions on the LED light therapy, please go ahead and type them up and send them over, and we'll go ahead and get them out to all the attendees and make sure that everybody has that information. So we will open it up for questions right now if you want to send your questions over on light therapy. We'll give it about 1.5 to 2 minutes, and then we'll move on to dermokinetics.